They said I sounded like a strangled goat. Those words echoed in my mind, sharp and bitter, every time I closed my eyes and replayed that humiliating night. It was not just the laughter that cut through me, but the cold, sneering way my granddaughter-in-law whispered it loud enough for everyone to hear, as if my very voice had become a joke, a punchline to amuse them. I am 72 years old, and I live alone now in a small, cramped guest house behind the house of the family that once called me Nana. But that wasn't always the case. There was a time when I was the heart of that house, the keeper of memories and songs, the one who sang lullabies that soothed children to sleep and sang out loud at weddings with the kind of hope only a grandmother holds deep inside. Now I am a shadow they laugh at. I am a voice they mock. That night, when the karaoke machine lit up and the music started, I tried to remember the joy in singing, how it once filled rooms and gathered people close. I chose a song from my youth, a simple tune that spoke of hope and the future. What will be will be. I sang it with what little strength I had left, trying to hold my trembling voice steady, trying to reclaim a little piece of myself. But as I sang, I saw them. Their smiles were tight, their eyes flickering with amusement, not warmth. My granddaughter-in-law pulled out her phone, holding it up like a weapon, filming me as if I were some strange exhibit, not a woman with years of stories behind her voice. The room buzzed with laughter, and in the moments after I finished, she shared the video with a cruel caption, mimicking goat bleats, sending it into the family's group chat, where it was met with a flood of emojis. Laughing faces, clapping hands, tears of mirth. I could have wept then, but instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and retreated to my quiet room, the walls closing in with every breath. I was no longer Nana. I was the joke. This was the beginning of a slow unraveling, a quiet descent from the place of honor to the place of scorn. Over the weeks that followed, the teasing became a constant hum in the background of my days. At family dinners, they would huddle together, passing around their phones and playing the video again, as if it were a cherished family memory rather than an act of cruelty. My presence became less and less welcome. Invitations to outings were forgotten or politely declined. The grandchildren began imitating the goat bleat whenever I spoke, turning their youthful laughter into a weapon that cut deeper than words. I found myself eating alone, retreating to the safety of my guest house where the silence was at least predictable. They called it giving me space, but the absence of their company was a deafening silence, a kind of exile within my own family. Even the neighbors started to notice. One afternoon, Mrs. Simmons from down the street stopped by with a sweet smile and a question that felt like a knife twisted slowly in my chest. "I saw that video on Facebook, dear. Was that really you singing?" It was so unique. I forced a polite smile, but inside, I felt stripped bare, humiliated not just by my own family, but by the wider world that had glimpsed my shame. My heart ached not only from the sting of the mockery, but from the cold realization that the people I loved most could so easily dismiss my dignity. Yet beneath the pain, something stubborn stirred. The voice they mocked was still mine. It was still there, fragile and trembling, but real. I began to search for a way to reclaim it, a way to remind myself, and perhaps them, that I was more than a punchline. One quiet evening, when the house was filled with the sound of laughter that did not include me, I found myself sitting alone by the family laptop, the glow of the screen casting long shadows on the walls. The house was empty except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. The laptop, left open in the living room, was still logged into the family's shared account. Curious and desperate for some glimpse of the people I had once been close to, I started clicking through folders and files, my fingers trembling slightly. That was when I found it. A folder named Office Karaoke, March Competition. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should open it, but something deep inside me urged me forward. Inside were dozens of videos, snippets of colleagues singing and dancing at their annual corporate karaoke night. I watched, first with amusement and then with disbelief. My grandson, the very one who had made me the butt of his jokes, was up there on video, singing terribly off-key, his voice cracking with every note. His wife was no better, her performance awkward and strained. These were people who, by all accounts, should have been able to sing well, or at least with enthusiasm. Yet their attempts were painful to watch, a far cry from the scorn they had heaped on me. The company logo was in the corner of the screen, a reminder that these performances were not private family fun, but part of their professional lives. Suddenly, a slow idea began to form in my mind. This was not just about laughter or embarrassment. It was about respect, about dignity, about reclaiming what had been taken from me. Over the next few days, I wrestled with the decision to act. Would this be an act of revenge or a quiet assertion of my worth? I thought about talking to someone, a friend or a counselor, but the words stayed caught in my throat. Instead, I made a choice in silence, a decision that was mine alone. I copied the files onto a thumb drive, carefully labeling the envelope and mailing it anonymously to the Human Resources Department of my grandson's company. I was careful not to reveal my identity, but the message was clear. If you mock someone, be prepared for the consequences. When the fallout began, I said nothing. I watched as whispers started, as hushed phone calls were made, and as my grandson suddenly took an extended leave from work. The household atmosphere shifted. The laughter stopped. The once confident glances became wary, uncertain. One evening, he knocked on my door, voice hesitant, eyes searching. "Did you do something, Nana?" he asked. I looked at him, tired but steady. "You humiliated me first," I said quietly. He said nothing. The silence between us said everything. That night, I packed my things and moved quietly into a small senior apartment I had applied for months earlier. A secret plan for a life apart from the family that had made me invisible. Now, in my new home, I sing, not the timid, trembling songs of that night, but songs filled with hope and strength, songs that remind me of who I am beyond their laughter. Thursdays, at the community center, I join a group of women who sing not to be judged, but to be heard. A woman named Pearl once told me my voice was like velvet on a bad day, and even that was lovely. I laughed then, a sound full and real. I am not a goat. I am a woman with a voice, and I have learned to use it. First to sing, then to speak, and finally to leave. If you are reading this, if someone has ever made you the punchline, remember this: the chorus always comes back around. The moment everything shifted for me was quieter than I expected. There was no loud argument, no shouted insult, no slammed door. It was the simple click of a screen, the flashing of a notification, and the slow sinking feeling in my chest that told me I was no longer welcome in the world I thought was mine. It happened one afternoon, just days after the karaoke incident. The house was alive with the usual noise of family, children playing in the yard, the hum of the television in the living room, and the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. I was in my small room, a space I had come to call my refuge. Though it was hardly more than a converted closet behind the garage, I sat by the window, staring out at the garden that once bloomed with my care, but now grew wild and untamed, much like my sense of belonging in that house. My phone buzzed softly on the table beside me. It was a message from my grandson Adam, a single line that felt colder than the winter wind outside. "We need to talk." I hesitated, my heart thudding, before I replied with a cautious, "Okay." Later that evening, after the family had gathered for dinner and the children had been sent to bed, Adam found me alone in the living room. His eyes were tight with something I couldn't quite place: regret, frustration, perhaps guilt, but he kept his voice steady. "Mom, about the video," he began, his fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of his shirt. I looked at him, trying to find a trace of the son I once knew beneath the young man who had so easily become a stranger. "Yes," I said softly, bracing myself. "It wasn't funny," he admitted, but there was no real apology, just a confession that felt more like an obligation than remorse. "It got out of hand, and I'm sorry." I nodded, but the words did little to soothe the ache in my chest. That night, as I lay awake, memories flooded back of better times. Birthday songs sung with laughter, holidays filled with music, moments when my voice had brought joy instead of scorn. But the next morning, the true betrayal came not from words, but from silence. I noticed it first in the way the family moved around me as if I were a ghost, a presence too fragile or inconvenient to acknowledge. At breakfast, no one asked how I slept or what I wanted to eat. Conversations paused when I entered the room, only to resume as if I were not there. Later, I overheard my granddaughter-in-law whispering to her sister in the kitchen, "She's so sensitive. Maybe we went too far." The sting of those words was sharp but hollow compared to what I was about to discover. As the day wore on, a strange tension settled over the house, thick and suffocating. I found myself retreating more and more into my room, seeking the comfort of solitude even as loneliness pressed in on all sides. Then came the call from the airline. A voice, polite but firm, informed me that a boarding pass had been issued for me on the flight to Hawaii scheduled that afternoon. My heart leapt with a flicker of hope. They were taking me on the family vacation after all. But the hope was cruelly short-lived. When I arrived at the airport, suitcase in hand, wearing the Vacation Nana t-shirt they had insisted I wear, I was told by the attendant that the plane had already departed without me. My family had boarded without a second glance back. It was no mistake, no forgotten ticket. It was a choice. They had left me behind. In that moment, standing alone in the crowded terminal, the weight of their betrayal crashed down like a tidal wave. I felt invisible, discarded, a relic they no longer needed or wanted. The humiliation was raw and deep, but beneath it was a cold clarity. This was the end of the life I had known, the closing of a chapter I had thought would last forever. Instead of despair, a strange calm settled over me. I bought a one-way ticket to Portland, the city where I had once lived before the family expanded and life became a series of demands and disappointments. I had enough money in a secret account. Money saved quietly over the years. A lifeline I had never dared to use. That ticket was my first act of defiance, a quiet rebellion against the erasure I had suffered. The plane lifted off into the darkening sky, leaving behind the laughter, the lies, and the silence that had become my prison. When I landed in Portland, the air smelled of rain and pine, fresh and sharp against my skin. The city was smaller than I remembered, or perhaps it was I who had grown smaller, folding in on myself under the weight of loss. I found a cheap motel room, a place to rest and gather my thoughts. As I lay on the narrow bed, the scratchy blanket against my arms, I realized something profound. I was free, not free in the way the world imagined freedom, with fanfare and celebration, but free in the quiet, stubborn way that comes when you stop waiting for permission to live. The following days were a blur of small, deliberate steps. I found a room to rent from a woman named Joyce, who was as gruff as she was kind. I applied for a job at a small cafe, trading my old life of unpaid labor for shifts behind the counter, earning every dollar with my own hands. Each morning, I made coffee for strangers who never asked about my past or my pain. Each evening, I returned to my small room, the navy coat I bought on sale hanging in the closet like a shield. Slowly, the sharp edges of humiliation softened into something else. Strength, resilience, a quiet pride that no one could take away. But the past, as it often does, came knocking. Letters arrived from my grandson, his words tinged with confusion and guilt. His mother, my granddaughter-in-law, came to the cafe, her polished smile failing to hide the tension beneath. Legal notices followed, attempts to assert control over my life and my assets. I met these with calm refusal, writing letters that spoke of boundaries and dignity. I was no longer the woman who waited quietly to be seen. I was a woman who chose herself, who reclaimed her voice and her space. One afternoon, my grandson came to visit. There was no anger, no tears, only a tentative, fragile connection that hinted at healing but did not demand it. I saw in him a reflection of the boy who once sat on my lap, who listened to my songs with wide eyes and open heart. That moment, gentle and real, was a balm I did not know I needed. Now, in my new life, I sing again, not for the approval of others, but for myself. I sing in the community center's choir, my voice weaving through the notes like a thread of hope. A woman named Pearl once told me my singing was velvet on a bad day, and I believed her. I am no longer a goat to be mocked. I am a woman with a voice, a woman who used that voice to break free, to heal, and to begin again. If you have ever felt the sting of mockery or the ache of invisibility, know this: you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your song is not finished. The chorus always comes back around. After that night, the night they turned my voice into a joke and sent that cruel video spiraling through our family chats, I thought the worst was behind me. I imagined that the humiliation would be a one-time sting, a harsh lesson learned by them or by me. But what followed was a slow, quiet erosion of my place, a gradual and relentless shrinking of my presence, until I was no longer even a part of the background. It was not a single act, a grand betrayal like the one at the karaoke machine or the flight they left me behind on. No, this was a creeping, insidious change, like a slow leak that deflates the tire while you're not looking, until you find yourself stranded in a place you no longer recognize. The mornings began with cold shoulders and clipped words. Breakfast, once a time of laughter and shared stories, became a silent affair. The kitchen table was set with fewer places, and the chair that had always been mine was moved to the far end, near the window where the light was dimmest. I sat there, the aroma of coffee and sizzling bacon filling the air, while they exchanged glances that carried unspoken messages. Stay quiet. Don't make waves. Be the good grandmother who knows her place. At first, I told myself it was just a phase, a reaction to the embarrassment of the video. Maybe they were embarrassed for me, or maybe they simply didn't know how to act around me anymore. But the pattern soon revealed itself. Invitations to family events came with caveats, or they came through third parties, never directly to me. I learned to read between the lines. You're welcome, but it might be hectic. We'll try to include you, but you understand. The kids have their own plans now. The "will try" became a polite refusal, and the kids became a shield behind which I was carefully excluded. The grandchildren, once eager for my attention and stories, began to mimic the mockery they had seen online. In their innocent cruelty, they would imitate the goat bleats, snicker behind their hands, or glance at their parents for approval when they made those noises. I caught one of them, my youngest grandson, pretending to sing like me in the grocery store aisle, drawing embarrassed looks from strangers. It was a painful reminder that the wounds ran deeper than the adults realized. Even the simplest conversations became battlegrounds of invisibility. When I spoke, my words were met with distracted nods or gentle shushes. "Mom, not now," my son would say, when I tried to join in a discussion about weekend plans. My thoughts and feelings, once cherished and sought after, were now considered interruptions or burdens. I found myself shrinking, my presence reduced to a polite nod or a forced smile. The house itself seemed to conspire against me. Rooms were rearranged, walls redecorated without my input. My favorite armchair, the one I had sat in for decades, was moved to a dusty corner and replaced by a sleek new recliner that seemed to mock the comfort I had once provided. The garden I had tended with love was left to wilt, weeds creeping where flowers once blossomed. It was as if they wanted to erase every trace of me, every memory I had carefully nurtured, and replace it with something new, something that didn't include me. I tried to hold on to the rituals that gave me a sense of belonging. I cooked the meals I used to make, hoping the familiar scents would bring me back into the fold. I set the table with the china I had collected over the years, polished the silver, and prepared desserts that once elicited praise. But these acts of love went unnoticed or unappreciated. Sometimes my son would eat silently and then disappear into the next room, phone in hand, eyes glued to the screen. My daughter-in-law would comment tersely, "Thanks," before rushing off to take a call. The children would complain about the food or ask for something from the microwave instead. My heart broke a little more each time. The loneliness was a heavy cloak I wore in the daylight, but at night it pressed down with a suffocating weight. I found myself wandering the house in the early hours, tracing the outlines of rooms filled with memories but devoid of warmth. I stared at old photographs, now gathering dust on shelves, reminders of a past life that felt like a distant dream. In those quiet moments, I asked myself what I had done wrong, what I had failed to do, and why the family I had given everything to now treated me like an unwelcome guest. I was caught between wanting to reach out and fearing more rejection. The silence between us grew louder with every passing day. My phone, once a lifeline to distant friends and relatives, became a source of anxiety. Calls went unanswered. Messages were ignored or delayed. Invitations to family gatherings arrived without my name or disappeared altogether. Social media feeds were filled with pictures of family outings and celebrations in which I was conspicuously absent. The world had moved on without me, and I was left to watch from the sidelines. Yet amidst the quiet despair, a small flame of resolve began to kindle within me. I realized that waiting for their acceptance or apology would only deepen my wounds. I needed to reclaim my own space, my own voice, and my own life. I started to take small steps, walking farther each day, exploring parts of the neighborhood I had never seen, finding comfort in the company of strangers rather than the coldness of family. I joined a local book club where the women welcomed me without judgment or pity. I volunteered at the community center, pouring my energy into helping others and finding purpose beyond the walls that had confined me. These new connections were fragile at first, but they grew stronger with time, weaving a safety net that held me when my own family could not. And slowly, very slowly, I began to sing again. Not for the laughter or the mockery, but for myself. In the quiet moments of dawn, with a cup of tea in hand, I would hum old songs that once brought me joy. At the community center, I found a small choir of women who sang without shame or fear, their voices rising in harmony and healing. Each note I sang was a small act of rebellion, a reclaiming of the dignity that had been stripped away. The path was long and uneven, marked by moments of doubt and sorrow. But I was no longer willing to be silenced or diminished. I was learning to stand again, to hold my head high, and to remind myself that my worth was never defined by their laughter or their rejection. This was my life, and I would live it on my own terms. And so, the quiet escalation continued, not in loud confrontations, but in the everyday acts of exclusion and dismissal that threatened to erase me. But with every slight, with every cold shoulder, I grew stronger. I learned that invisibility is not the end, but a beginning, a chance to find light in the shadows and to build a life that honors the woman I am beneath the mockery. If you find yourself in that place, know that you are not alone. Your voice matters, even when they try to silence it. Your presence is real, even when they pretend you are not there, and your story is waiting to be told, in the quiet moments and the loud ones alike. It was a moment of quiet awakening, a subtle shift beneath the surface of all the pain and rejection that had settled over me like a heavy fog. I had spent so long trying to fit into a world that no longer wanted me, so many nights swallowed by loneliness and silence, that I nearly forgot how to choose for myself. But something inside me stirred that day, something tender yet resolute, like the first fragile buds pushing through frozen earth in early spring. I remember it clearly, the morning light filtering through the thin curtains of my small, rented room, casting soft patterns on the worn wooden floor. I sat at the tiny table, a cup of coffee warming my hands, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting someone else's life. Instead, I felt a faint but undeniable flicker of agency, the slow return of a voice that had been muffled but never extinguished. The decision was simple, yet profound. I would stop waiting for permission, for invitations, for apologies that might never come. I would start living on my own terms again, even if that meant starting small and uncertain. That day, I took a walk through the neighborhood, letting my feet lead me without a plan or destination. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. Birds called softly from the trees, their songs a gentle reminder that life continued to turn, even when it felt like mine had stalled. I passed by a small bakery with a handwritten sign in the window, "Help Wanted." On a whim, I stepped inside and asked if they were still hiring. The young woman behind the counter, surprised but kind, gave me the details and encouraged me to come for an interview. It was a small step, but it felt like a doorway opening, a chance to reclaim some purpose and connection. Days later, I found myself behind the counter, learning the rhythm of making coffee, greeting customers, and finding satisfaction in simple tasks. The work was hard for my tired body, but it grounded me. For the first time in a long time, I felt needed, not for who I had been or what I had done for others, but for who I was in that moment. Alongside this new routine, I found comfort in unexpected places. Joyce, the woman who rented me the small room, was gruff but honest. She didn't ask questions or offer pity. She simply shared her space with me, and, over time, a quiet friendship grew between us. She had her own scars and stories, and in her company, I felt less alone. One afternoon, as we sat on her creaky porch, she handed me a worn paperback novel and said, "You should finish this. Sometimes stories can remind us who we are." I took the book and smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. I began to rebuild my days with intention. Mornings were for work and learning new skills. Afternoons, I explored the city, discovering parks and quiet corners where I could breathe and think. Evenings were for reading, writing letters I wasn't sure I would send, and sometimes just sitting in silence with a cup of tea. I bought myself a navy wool coat from a second-hand store, a small but meaningful act of self-respect. When I tried it on, the fabric felt like a soft shield against the cold and the past. It wasn't just clothing. It was proof that I was still here, still choosing for myself, still worthy of care. Slowly, I began to sing again, not in front of an audience or for the family that had dismissed me, but quietly, to myself, as a balm and a promise. Each note was a step back to the woman I had been and a step forward to the woman I was becoming. I was learning to listen to my own voice, to honor my own needs, and to find peace in the space I had carved out for myself. It was not a grand transformation, not a triumphant return, but a gentle, steady reclaiming of dignity and hope. I understood that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one written not with the ink of past pain, but with the quiet strength of survival and choice. If you find yourself lost in the shadow of rejection, remember that the smallest acts, putting on a coat that fits just right, stepping outside to breathe fresh air, singing a song only you can hear, can be the first steps toward a life reclaimed. The road ahead may be uncertain, but it is yours to walk at your own pace, with your own voice leading the way. The past, like an unwelcome visitor, has a way of returning when you least expect it, slipping through the cracks of your new life to remind you that some wounds don't fully heal without confrontation. Just as I was beginning to find my rhythm in Portland, balancing my shifts at the cafe, settling into my modest room, and tasting the fragile sweetness of independence, the fragile peace was tested by the arrival of letters, visits, and reminders that the family I left behind had not forgotten me, nor forgiven the silence I chose. It began with a letter, an envelope with no return address but unmistakable handwriting. The looping script I recognized instantly as my grandson Kieran's. His words were simple and earnest, a thread of warmth woven through the chill of my isolation. He wrote of worry and hope, of nights spent waiting by the phone, and of the family's frantic search for me. There was no blame in his letter, only longing and the quiet wish that I was safe. For a moment, I felt the pull of old ties, the ache of belonging to a family that had once been my world. But I folded the letter carefully and tucked it away, not ready to bridge the silence, not yet willing to step back into the life that had left me behind. Then came the visit from Lisa, my granddaughter-in-law. I saw her first through the window of the cafe where I worked, standing stiffly by the pastry display, her polished coat too fine for the drizzle, her expression unreadable. She did not enter, choosing instead to linger just outside, pretending to study the chalkboard menu as if she were a customer rather than the woman who had helped orchestrate my exclusion. I finished my shift without a word to her, letting her sweat in the cool air like a truth that needed no immediate answer. When she finally stepped inside, her voice was low and hesitant, carrying the weight of rehearsed apologies and unspoken accusations. "Martha," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded toward the back of the cafe, offering a booth where we could sit without the curious eyes of strangers. She told me of panic and confusion, of how they had thought I was somewhere safe, somewhere behind them, that their failure to check on me was a mistake born of chaos, not cruelty. But I remembered the 8 hours I had spent alone in the airport lounge, the cold dismissal behind false smiles, and I met her words with a steady gaze. 8 hours, Lisa," I said softly. 8 hours without a call, without a check. You didn't think I'd leave. I did. Silence stretched between us, taut and heavy. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "I don't want anything from you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But Kieran, he's struggling. He misses you." I took the envelope, but did not open it. "He doesn't need a go-between," I replied. "He knows how to call." She looked up then, no longer the polished hostess, but a woman stripped of pretense, small and tired. "I wasn't trying to replace you," she said. "I just didn't want your shadow in every room." That was the closest thing to honesty I had heard from her. I stood, gathering the quiet strength that had been growing within me these past weeks. "I'm not your shadow, Lisa," I said firmly. "I'm my own person, and I've finally remembered how to be one." She left without finishing her coffee, and I returned to the counter, the weight of years and choices settling around me like a mantle. But the visits and letters did not stop there. A lawyer appeared one afternoon, representing Adam and Lisa, bringing with him formal requests and carefully worded concerns about my well-being and assets. His tone was polite but firm, a reminder that even legal language can carry the subtle force of control. "They're very concerned," he said, "and would like to ensure you are in a safe environment." I folded my apron and placed it on the counter, looking him directly in the eye. "Tell Adam and Lisa, I am not a pet," I said. "They forgot to pick me up, and there are no next steps unless I take them." He hesitated, then left without pressing further, blinking in the daylight as I walked past him and out the door. Outside, Arthur, the kind man who frequented the cafe, was waiting. His eyes held quiet concern as he asked, "You okay?" "Yes," I said, "because I'm not going to let anyone convince me I'm not." The pressure from the past came wrapped in thinly veiled concern, public performances of worry published in local newspapers, and private attempts to draw me back into the family fold under terms I would not accept. The community buzzed with stories of the missing matriarch, their words painting me as vulnerable and confused, as if I were a child lost rather than a woman who had chosen her path. I laughed bitterly when I read the articles, the performance of innocence so stark against the truth of being left behind, like unwanted luggage. Heather, my supervisor at the cafe, brought me a copy with quiet sympathy. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Never better," I replied, holding the clipping not for sentiment, but as proof. Proof that people only start to worry when they can no longer use you. The tension culminated in a quiet but firm refusal to return. I wrote letters, one to the lawyer, making clear my autonomy and my right to live free of harassment, and another to Lisa, brief but resolute. "I know what you did," I wrote. "I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your own life now." The letters were my final act of setting boundaries. Cutting ties not out of spite, but from the hard-won knowledge that some doors, once closed, are not meant to be reopened. Yet, amidst the storm of past demands and present refusals, moments of warmth and connection blossomed. Arthur became a steady presence in my life, his quiet kindness a balm to the wounds left by family fractures. Our conversations, simple and unhurried, spoke of birds and books and the gentle rhythms of days lived with intention. I began to understand that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about weaving it into the tapestry of a new life, one that belonged to me alone. The second escalation was not a return to pain, but a deepening of resolve, a testing of the boundaries I had set and the strength I had found. It was a reckoning with the past that demanded I stand firmly in my truth, refusing to be diminished or defined by those who had once tried to erase me. If you find yourself at such a crossroads, know that the past may reach out to pull you back, but it is within your power to choose how far you will go and when you will say enough. The moment I finally reclaimed my power was not marked by fireworks or loud declarations, but by a quiet and deliberate act that rippled through the silence of years spent waiting and hoping for recognition. It was the day I sent the letter to the lawyer, the one appointed by Adam and Lisa to represent their interests in what they called my well-being and the management of my affairs. I sat at the small kitchen table of my rented room, the familiar hum of the city outside barely reaching the peace I was crafting within. The envelope lay before me, heavy with words that I had chosen carefully, each sentence a thread, weaving a tapestry of autonomy and resolve. "To whom it may concern," I wrote, "there is no cause for further legal contact. I am of sound mind, in a safe environment, and not under duress. I have retained local legal counsel. Any further attempts to contact me under the guise of concern will be considered harassment. Sincerely, Martha Harlow." I read the letter aloud, letting the words settle into the room like a stone laid firmly in place. This was not a tantrum or a cry for attention. It was a boundary set with the steady hand of a woman who had walked through fire and come out stronger on the other side. I signed it with a hand that no longer trembled at the thought of confrontation, and sealed the envelope with a quiet finality. The next morning, I took the letter to the post office myself, handing it over to the clerk with a calm smile that belied the storm that had brewed inside me for so long. It was the end of a chapter, but not the end of my story. That evening, I wrote another letter, this time to Lisa. It was brief, 3 lines that carried the weight of years and the lightness of release. "I know what you did. I know what you didn't say. I'm not angry. I'm not coming back. Take care of your own life now." I folded the note carefully and sent it off with a stamp adorned with a finch, a bird that sings even in the cold. The act of sending these letters was an eruption of self-respect that surprised even me. It was not revenge, but a reclaiming of dignity and a refusal to be cast as a victim any longer. The following days brought silence, a quiet that felt less like abandonment and more like the space I needed to breathe. Lisa, however, did not accept the end so easily. One gray Thursday afternoon, she appeared at the cafe where I worked, a figure polished and tense against the backdrop of the bustling morning rush. Heather, my supervisor, spotted her first and warned me with a glance that carried a mixture of curiosity and concern. Lisa stood stiffly by the pastry display, pretending to study the chalkboard menu, a woman out of place in the life I was building. I did not approach her. Instead, I focused on my work, letting her wait in the uncomfortable silence of a room where I was no longer the invisible grandmother, but a woman who refused to be rushed or coerced. When Lisa finally stepped forward and spoke, her voice was low and laced with a vulnerability I had not expected. "Martha," she said, "can we talk?" I nodded toward the back of the cafe, offering a booth that was empty and waiting. She told me of panic and regret, of how they had thought I was safe, somewhere behind them, a mistake in the chaos of their lives. But I met her words with the quiet strength of someone who had learned to listen to herself first. 8 hours, Lisa, I said softly. 8 hours alone in an airport lounge. You didn't think I'd leave. I did. The silence between us stretched like a taut thread, ready to snap but holding on by fragile hope. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, a gesture that felt like an offering and a plea. "I don't want anything from you," she said quietly. "But Kieran, he's struggling. He misses you." I took the envelope but did not open it. "He doesn't need a go-between," I replied. "He knows how to call." Lisa looked up, no longer the woman who smoothed over dinner parties, but someone who had been worn down by the weight of truth. "I wasn't trying to replace you," she said. "I just didn't want your shadow in every room." That honesty, raw and unexpected, was the final crack in the wall I had built around my heart. I stood then, gathering the dignity and strength that had been forged in solitude. "I am not your shadow, Lisa," I said firmly. "I am my own person, and I have finally remembered how to be one." She left without finishing her coffee, and I returned to the counter, to the rhythm of my work and the steady pulse of my own reclaimed life. The climax of my journey was not in the battles fought or the words exchanged, but in the simple acts of choosing myself, sending those letters, standing my ground, moving into my own apartment, and living a life that no longer depended on the approval or recognition of those who had once sought to diminish me. It was the day I stopped being a victim and became the author of my own story. That night, I sat by the window, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, and I sang softly to myself, a melody that carried both the weight of my past and the promise of my future. In that song, I found peace. If you find yourself at a crossroads, facing the weight of rejection and the fear of loneliness, know this: your power lies not in the approval of others, but in the quiet, steadfast choices you make for yourself. It is never too late to reclaim your voice, your dignity, and your life. The quiet that settled over my life after the storms and confrontations was not emptiness, but a space filled with new possibilities. I had crossed the threshold from being someone defined by others' needs and judgments to a woman who chose her own path, her own company, and her own peace. It was not an easy journey. There were days when the loneliness pressed in, when memories of rejection and betrayal lingered like shadows at the edges of my mind. But slowly, very slowly, I learned to fill those spaces with something gentler and stronger: acceptance, self-respect, and hope. One of the most precious moments came unexpectedly, in the form of a letter from Kieran. After weeks of silence and hesitation, his handwriting arrived on my doorstep, a fragile thread reaching across the distance we had created. His words were simple, honest, and free of the guilt and anger that had marked so many of the other messages. He spoke of missing me, of wanting to understand, and of hope for a future where we might rebuild what had been broken. I read his letter over and over, feeling a softness bloom in my chest, a tenderness I thought I had lost forever. I wrote back slowly, carefully, offering not promises or demands, but an open door. When we finally met, it was neither a reunion nor a farewell, but a beginning. Tentative, quiet, and filled with the unspoken understanding that healing takes time and space. Our embrace was long and gentle, a balm for years of silence and pain. I told him then, and I tell you now, that you are always enough, just as you are. In this new life I built, I found joy in the small things. The smell of fresh coffee in the morning, the softness of a wool coat wrapped around me on a chilly day, the laughter shared with new friends at the community center. I sang again, not for anyone else but for myself, letting the music fill the spaces where doubt and fear had once lived. The friendship with Joyce, the steady presence of Arthur, and the warmth of my new community became the foundation upon which I stood. They did not erase the past, but they helped me carry it with grace. I baked cakes for potlucks and shared stories that were mine alone, stories of survival, resilience, and the quiet power of choosing oneself. I kept the letters and the clippings, not as trophies of pain, but as reminders of how far I had come and how much strength lay within me. Sometimes I would write notes to myself, tucked away in drawers or tucked inside books, a quiet conversation between the woman I was and the woman I was becoming. Dear me, I would write, you waited so long for someone to save you. You forgot you were always the one holding the key. You didn't lose them. They let go. And you finally let go back. And look at the life that opened. Well done. Love me. These words carried me through days of doubt and moments of joy, a steady hand guiding me forward. I share this story not because it is extraordinary, but because it is real. Because I know that there are women out there who feel invisible, unheard, and unloved, who wonder if they will ever reclaim their worth and their voice. To you, I say, it is never too late. Your life is yours to build, your voice is yours to raise, and your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. When you choose yourself, when you step away from the places and people that diminish you, you create space for something new and beautiful to grow. And when you do, come back and tell me. I'll be here, listening, with a cup of tea and a chair waiting for you. Because in this quiet, steady way, we find each other again, not as shadows or echoes, but as the women we were always meant to be, whole, strong, and free. And if this story has touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment. Let someone know that the journey toward freedom and dignity is possible at any age, and that the chorus always comes back around. It had been almost a year since I sent those letters, since I drew the lines in ink that no one could cross without my consent. Life had grown quieter in a way I once thought would feel empty, but instead, it felt whole, like a room that had finally been cleared of clutter and could breathe again. My days had their own rhythm now. Mornings at the cafe, afternoons at the park or with a book, evenings spent in the low hum of the community center choir. The world outside my little circle could have been spinning faster, noisier, full of family dramas and petty grievances, but I no longer felt the pull to step into that whirlwind. One afternoon in early spring, I was sitting on a wooden bench at the edge of the river, watching the water carry bits of pollen and petals downstream. The air was warm, but carried a faint chill that reminded me winter had only just left. Arthur appeared beside me, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. He didn't say much, he rarely did, but he handed me 1 cup and nodded toward the water. "Looks fast today," he said. I smiled, knowing he was talking about more than the current. That was when I saw them, Lisa and Adam, across the park, standing awkwardly near the playground. They didn't see me at first, but then Lisa's eyes caught mine, and there was a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Not pity, not shame exactly, but something quieter. She nudged Adam, and for a moment, the 3 of us stood frozen in that strange triangle of history and silence. They didn't approach, and I didn't wave. Instead, I took a slow sip of coffee and let the wind move between us. It wasn't a cold wind, but it wasn't warm either. It was just enough to remind me of the distance I had chosen and the peace that had come from keeping it. Later that week, a small, padded envelope arrived in my mailbox. Inside was a flash drive. No note, no explanation. I almost tossed it aside, but curiosity won. On it were videos, not the cruelly edited ones from before, but simple, unpolished clips of the children singing in their school play. Lisa laughing too loudly at a joke, Adam awkwardly strumming a guitar. There was no apology attached, but the message was clear enough. We are still here if you want to look. I watched the clips once, then twice, feeling that familiar ache behind my ribs. I didn't cry. I didn't call, but I didn't delete them either. I put the flash drive in a small wooden box where I keep my letters from Kieran and a few other things that remind me of who I've been. Spring turned into summer, and I found myself more rooted in the life I had built. The choir planned a small performance in the park, and for the first time in years, I agreed to sing solo. I chose a song without irony, without any hidden meaning, just something I loved. When the day came, the sun was warm, and the air smelled faintly of lilacs. I stood on the small stage, looking out at the folding chairs filled with neighbors and strangers. Somewhere in the back, I thought I saw Kieran, but I didn't let myself stare too long. I began to sing, my voice steady and warm, filling the air with something that belonged only to me. In that moment, I realized the truest part of this journey wasn't about them at all. It was about reclaiming my own reflection, the one I could stand to look at in the mirror without wincing. People change, relationships shift, but the voice I had thought they'd stolen was never truly gone. It had been waiting, patient and unbroken, for me to use it again. After the performance, a young woman from the audience approached me, tears in her eyes. "My grandmother used to sing that song," she said. "Hearing you, it made me feel like she was here again." I smiled, touched her arm lightly, and said, "That's the gift of a song. It can find its way home to someone else's heart." That night, sitting by my window with the city lights stretched out, before me, I thought about how far I'd come from that night in the airport, from that cold chair in the corner of my son's kitchen, from the sharp laughter that had cut me down. I didn't need revenge anymore, not even justice. What I had was better. My own life, my own voice, and a peace they could never take away. If they call one day, maybe I'll answer. Maybe I won't. That's the difference now. It's my choice. And when I wake in the morning, with sunlight spilling across my little table and the scent of coffee rising in the air, I know I have already won.